Hello again, everybody. This is Rebecca, and today we're going to talk about writing thesis statements for comparison essays. Do you know the names of these two sports? The one on the left is American football. The football is shaped like this. And the one on the right is rugby, and the ball is shaped like this. Do you think these sports are more similar or more different? I think they are quite similar in two specific ways. So let's look at writing a thesis statement about it. Thesis statements for comparison essays need to have all the same things that other thesis statements have. They need to include the two things that are being compared. In this case, it's American football and rugby. And I'm going to call these thing 1 and thing 2. It also needs to mention the essay type, which in this case is similarities. And they need to include the two subtopics, of course. In this case, I decided my two subtopics would be intense physical contact and methods of scoring. Both of these sports have a lot of physical contact between players, and both of them score in similar ways. You can either have the ball go across a goal line or you can kick it to get points. So let's look at some examples for thesis statements using this topic. To start with, we have a little template here. You can see we start with thing 1 and thing 2 as a noun or gerund subject. Then we have a verb, have or share. Then we have our number 2 and an adjective if we want. Then we say similarities or things in common. These have the same meaning. And we can do it in two ways, with the colon and make a list, or with the relative clause. So let's look at a couple examples. American football and rugby share two similarities, which are their intense physical contact and their methods of scoring. You see here we have our T1 and T2, thing 1 and thing 2. We have our verb share. I say two similarities. I didn't put in an adjective. It's up to you. And I'm using this form, similarities, which are, and then I list my two things using parallel structure. Their intense physical contact and their methods of scoring. Subtopic 1 and subtopic 2. Let's look at the next one. American football and rugby, T1 and T2, have two main things in common. Things in common, two main things in common, and the colon. And this tells us that there's going to be a list. In this case, I've done it with gerund phrase, having a lot of physical contact and scoring in the same ways. So having and scoring, I'm using parallel structure. Let's look at the topic sentences that could come out of these thesis statements. For the first body paragraph, we might say this. The first similarity between these two sports is the physical contact between players. Now, I'm saying these two sports because this sentence comes right after this sentence in the essay. So we don't really need to say American football and rugby again in the same way. We can shorten it a little bit and it makes it sound a little more natural. But then for the second body paragraph, we might say them again because we're further away from the thesis statement. American football and rugby are also alike in how points are scored. And here I have a noun clause. I'm using a noun clause. Here's another structure that we could use for our thesis statement. Thing 1 and thing 2, again, it's our subject, are similar, are alike. So instead of using our have or share verb, we're using a form of to be, are, they are, and then we're using an adjective. Are similar, are alike. And then we have two possibilities here. We could say in that plus our two subtopics, but these will be in a sentence form with a subject and a verb. And I'll show you an example. American football and rugby are similar in that they are very physical and score points in the same ways. I have a subject and a verb before I put my two subtopics. With this structure in that, you must follow it with a sentence form. For some people, this might be an easier way to do it. The other way, we can use are similar, are alike in terms of, or just in. You can use both. And then we use, again, our noun gerund phrase or a noun clause. Let's look at these. American football and rugby are alike in, or in terms of, being physical sports and scoring points in the same ways. So here I'm using gerunds, being and scoring. Or I could do it with just nouns, are similar in terms of physical contact and scoring methods. Or I could do it with a noun clause. American football and rugby are alike in how physical they are and how points are scored. So I have a gerund structure or a noun structure or a noun clause structure. And any of them are fine, whatever you're comfortable with, but just make sure you're using parallel structure, that both subtopics are written with the same type of grammar. Now, don't forget that the two things you're comparing, thing 1 and thing 2, don't have to just be nouns like American football and rugby. They can also be gerunds. And these can be especially useful for comparing activities. Let's look at this example. In this case, my thing 1 and thing 2 are going to a football match or watching the match on television. And in this case, I am going to say that they are similar. So for my subtopic 1 and my subtopic 2, I have emotional response and social interaction, similarities. You could probably use these same two things and write a differences essay, but that would have different subtopics. My idea for emotional response is that whether you're at the match or watching on TV, you are happy when your team scores a goal, you are angry if someone gets a yellow card, so your emotions in terms of the game are the same in both places. And for social interaction, you go to the match with your friends or you watch on television with your friends, so you're having the same social interaction in both places. But here, I'm not writing the whole essay today. We're just going to look at the thesis statements. So let's look at a few more examples. This is a third structure that you can use. In this case, thing 1 and thing 2 resemble, that's a very useful word, or we could say are similar to each other. So this is our reflexive pronoun. They are similar to each other in two aspects, in two ways. And then we have our list for our subtopics. You could also divide up your things and say thing 1 is similar to thing 2 or is like thing 2 in two ways. Let's look at some examples. Watching football on television and going to the stadium, so here I'm using gerunds, resemble each other in two aspects, emotions and social interactions. Here I'm using two nouns. I should make it clear this structure is not only for gerund type of subjects. We could use the same structure for American football and rugby, but I'm just showing you how to also use it with gerunds. Here's another one with the second style here. Going to a football match is like watching one on television in two ways, feeling emotions and being social. So here I'm using gerunds for my subtopics also. We could write some topic sentences related to these. Watching football on television and going to the match are alike in that the emotions are the same. Remember, when we use in that, we need a sentence afterwards. So we have the emotions are a subject and are is our verb. The emotions are the same. The second topic sentence could be, these two ways of experiencing football are also similar in terms of the time you spend with friends. So I've changed my way of talking about these things a little bit because it makes the writing a little more interesting if you can not repeat the same phrases over and over. So those are our three different styles. I mean, there's more than three in there, but the three basic structures for these thesis statements. So now I'd like you to try some practice. I'm going to give you three topics here. So for each one, think of ways that they are similar and write a thesis statement and try to do each one a little differently. So for our first topic, one that should be familiar to you, online learning and traditional education. What two ways are these the same? And write a thesis statement for that. Second one is living with friends and living with family. So we're using one that's in a gerund structure here. And the third one is being an architect and being an engineer. Now this one you could do as a gerund like this, or you could just do it as the nouns. An architect and an engineer are similar in terms of etc. So they could be either way here. So why don't you pause the video and maybe scroll back along the time and look back at the earlier slides for some examples and write your three thesis statements. When you're done, I'll go on to the next screen. So here, I'm going to show you mine, and I hope you've taken the time to try to write your own. Of course, yours and mine will not be exactly the same, but hopefully you will have similar structures. So for the first one, I wrote, online learning and traditional education are alike in terms of the relationship with the teacher and the material that is learned. So we're using are alike. And when we say in terms of, we have two noun phrases here. Ignore that extra and, sorry. And the next one, living with friends resembles living with family in that everyone shares responsibilities and enjoys spending time together. So here I have separated thing one and thing two with our resembles verb. And using in that, then I'm writing it as a sentence structure. Subject, verb. Everyone shares and everyone enjoys. And my third one, being an architect and being an engineer have two primary things in common. Colon, how much education is needed and how important it is to do the job correctly. So I have noun clauses here for this structure. So each of these is a little different. Hopefully you will find a way that works well for you. And that's the end of this lesson. Thank you for watching.